This morning, tensions are continuing to grow between Australia's Jewish and Palestinian communities.
One is a terror group, according to
and one is a
Australian
fully
government.
militarised, a state with a full military.
Israel must comply and observe with international humanitarian law.
I'm disappointed and concerned that Penny Wong has announced what appears to be a shift in government policy on insiders.
Look, at the end of the day, Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to care one little bit about what Penny Wong has to say.
Albanese government ministers and MPs generally have been working hard to get the tone right of their comments on what is happening in the Middle East, a task made all the more difficult by the changing nature of the story. Since the horrendous Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7 and the continuing escalation of Israel attacks on Gaza, the government has been criticised both for not condemning Hamas enough and for backing Israel's right to defend itself without restraint. A sense in local communities that the Palestinian side was not being heard led to what at the time was a striking intervention just under a month ago.
I feel very strongly that Palestinians are being collectively punished here for Hamas's barbarism. I really do feel that there is an obligation on governments, particularly the Israeli government, to, as we have said, follow the rules of international law and to observe, in particular, that innocence should be protected.
Since that time, the growing death toll among civilians in Gaza has only made the message more difficult. The day-to-day focus now is on Israel's actions, and the government is facing different questions about its position on the conflict.
Look, I am deeply concerned by the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, as are so many in the world. What I would say is we all want to take the next steps towards a ceasefire, but it cannot be one-sided. Hamas still holds hostages. Hamas is still attacking Israel. I called for restraint in my very first response and was criticised by Peter Dutton. How Israel defends itself matters. And when we affirm Israel's right to defend itself, what we have also saying is Israel must comply and observe with international humanitarian law.
To summarise the Foreign Minister's remarks, she called for restraint on both sides, to seek a two-sided ceasefire, for Israel to observe international law. This was not quite how the opposition leader characterised her comments in question time today.
And my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister yesterday claimed that Israel, in carrying out its defensive war against terror group Hamas, is breaching international law and should undertake a ceasefire. Is this the government's position?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The transcript of yesterday's interview said that she did not say that. The position on the Middle East is a complex one, and one that we know is causing great distress for Jewish Australians, for Palestinian Australians, and for people of Islamic faith as well. We know that we have a responsibility to not seek to politicise these matters, but to engage in a principled way going forward. I condemn unequivocally as well the decision by some to have a demonstration in Caulfield on Friday night, as I condemn unequivocally the decision to ride motorbikes through the eastern suburbs of Sydney.
Introducing politics into sensitive issues is always fraught, but keeping it out of the vexed story of Robodebt seemed to be impossible today. The government handed down its response to the Royal Commission into Robodebt today, and the response did not go to the more colourful stuff about which politicians and public servants might be accountable. That is still the subject of investigations. It was about recommendations addressing how the mechanics of the social welfare bureaucracy works. But ministers were keeping it pretty political.
The Liberal Party's Robodebt scheme was not an innocent mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated scheme. The Royal Commission found that Robodebt was a crude and cruel mechanism, neither fair nor legal, and it made many people feel like criminals.
We do not believe in a war on the poor. It was Labor who called for the class action, which the coalition opposed.
It was Labor who called for the Royal Commission, which the now Leader of the Opposition, Mr Dutton, called a political witch hunt.
The government says it has agreed or agreed in principle to all 56 recommendations of the Royal Commission, which sounds commendable, but it is still going to have debt collectors, even if, according to Bill Shorten,
we've stopped using external debt collectors.
And it is still going to, quote, develop a legal framework to support automated decision-making. Notably, the government is steering well clear of Royal Commissioner Catherine Holmes' extensive commentary on the practice of classifying government documents to keep them out of the scope of the Freedom of Information Act. Commissioner Holmes said the impact of this practice was that Cabinet had not been told the scheme would not be legal without legislative change. In light of this, Commissioner Holmes made it pretty clear what she thought should happen.
Section 34 of the Commonwealth FOI Act should be repealed. The Commonwealth Cabinet Handbook should be amended so that the description of a document as a Cabinet document is no longer itself justification for maintaining the confidentiality of the document.
But
the Commissioner made a closing comment rather than a recommendation.
So you won't be taking that up?
And we will not be amending the Freedom of Information Act.
And with that, confirmation that neither side of politics is actually interested in addressing a key part of the culture of government which allowed Robodebt to cause so much pain to thousands of Australians.